Hey everybody, this is Professor Skiles doing a brief video lecture on William Shakespeare. And I'm going to try to make this brief because I know I can talk for hours. So what's the deal about William Shakespeare? Okay, many people believe William Shakespeare is the best British writer of all times. Some people will argue that he is the greatest playwright of the English language. Some will argue that he is the greatest writer of the English language. But for theatrical purposes, why do we care? All right, so there's Willie. We know he was born in 1564. We don't know exactly the day he was born. We know that he was baptized April 26th. And because of that, we think that babies were allowed to live for about 3 days to make sure they would live, because there was a very high mortality rate. And so we assume that he was born on April the 23rd, and that's sort of the conventional celebratory day for his birth. Now, we know he was baptized because that record still exists on the books in the church in Stratford-on-Avon, and you can still go there and see that book. And he died on his birthday in 1616. And so whether he actually was born on April 23rd doesn't really matter now, because most people just like the sort of round numbers of the fact that he was born and died on the same day. His father was John Shakespeare. He was a glove maker. He didn't have an exceptional education. His Mary, Mother Arden, was a housewife. We know that he had an 8th grade education. He did marry Anne Hathaway, not the modern one, but the one from back in that time period. And he had a daughter, Susanna. She did the best for her family. She married a doctor. I've been to her house. And he had twins, Hamnet and Judith. And notice that Judith is never used as a character in Shakespeare, and Hamlet is used, but not Hamnet. So he didn't really draw on the names of his family for his plays. So his plays occur between 1589 and 1613. So let me back up one slide. He was born in 1564. He doesn't write until 1589. Now, doing really quick math, 64 to 74, 10 years, to 84, 10 years, and another 5, so he was 25 when he started writing, and he wrote almost his whole life. He did not write the last 3 years. Early plays are comedies and histories. He wrote more comedies than anything else. That's what people liked to watch back then. It's what people like to watch now. And he wrote histories. These are histories specific to the British monarchy. So they're all the kings. His middle works were tragedies, and his later works were tragicomedies, which means he starts to blend the two things together. Now, the tragedies are very, very specific. They have to have somebody of noble birth, royalty, prince, and they have to have a fatal flaw, which is sometimes pride or greed, and they probably will die. And right before they die, they will learn an important lesson. That's the rules of Greek tragedy, and that's what Shakespeare learned, so he would have rolled that forward. The political times are interesting because Shakespeare was writing for the crown. So in 5 minutes, can I sum up what's going on? Okay, you see the picture here? That is Queen Elizabeth I. She is a daughter of Henry VIII. Okay, Henry VIII originally marries Catherine of Aragon. That's Spain. It's a good political alliance, but they do like each other, and they have a child together, Mary I. All right, and so when Henry eventually dies, his oldest heir will take the throne. I'll come back to that in a minute. But after Henry marries Catherine of Aragon and has Mary, he sees Anne Boleyn, and he really wants her in the worst way. But the Catholic Church, the controlling religion of England, says no divorce. So this sets into motion years of political and religious turmoil in England that eventually causes Henry to establish Protestant religion, the Church of England, to become the national religion, which allows him to divorce Catherine and marry Anne. And they have Elizabeth. So, when he passes away, Mary takes his place on the throne. Now, he was a Protestant, so he could get divorced, but Mary won. She's a good Catholic girl, daughter of Catherine of Aragon. She sets the country back to Catholicism. Then she passes. We have some scrambling for the throne. Eventually it lands in Elizabeth's lap, and she makes the country go back to Protestant religion and all of the political turmoil involved. Now, her reign is called the Golden Age. She manages to keep the country together for a long, long time. When she dies, the crown passes to James the First. He's the King James Bible guy. He is also a Protestant, but he is unable to try to keep things together in the country. The country falls apart, and as you see here, eventually the theaters will be banned and burned in the Puritan Revolution of 1642. And if Puritan sounds familiar, remember they hopped on the Mayflower and came over here and founded this country. So, all the political unrest, all the religious turmoil is coming up in Shakespeare's plays. And he's a tool of the crown. Because he's writing for Elizabeth, he writes a very pro-Elizabeth message. So, we also have these theater buildings that come into existence. We have these first modern houses. They have some interesting names: the Globe, the Fortune, the Swan, the Rose, the Hope, and the Theater. You'd think they could be more creative than that. But more importantly, each had 3 levels surrounding a yard. People would stand in the yard, and then people would sit on the 3 levels. And that's how you watched the play. So, another interesting thing is that Shakespeare worked under 2 monarchs. He started writing plays under Queen Elizabeth, and at that time his company of actors was called the Lord Chamberlain's Men, because no women were allowed to be involved in theater at this time in England. They couldn't be called the Queen's Men, even though she was supplying the money, because it would be considered lewd or scandalous. When Elizabeth passes and King James takes the throne, they finally get the best name ever, the King's Men. So this will come up in your final exam. Remember that Shakespeare worked for 2 monarchs, Queen Elizabeth and James I, and he had a different name for his acting troupe under the different monarchs. So this is the Globe as I saw it in 2011. Not a particularly beautiful day in London, but I didn't care. And this is me standing on the corner by the Globe Theatre, and unfortunately 2 of my friends asked me about Shakespeare, and I sort of launched off into all of that explanation. This is the inside of the Globe. We're on the 2nd level here looking down. You can see people standing. Really the only difference between this Globe and the original is that they paved or put concrete down for the yard. Originally the yard would have been dirt. But you can see the 3 levels of seating here. Ironically, the most expensive seating was at the top because it got you the furthest away from the stink of the people standing on the ground. The ground people were called groundlings. They were the commoners. They paid about a penny to get in and see the play. They didn't wash very often. They stank. So the rich people sat up high to get away from them. Here's the look of the roof over the stage. This is always here. The only difference is you see some greenery, and that was specifically designed for the show that we saw there. And there's the stage. The regular stage is the rectangle, the bump out with the little wading pools. That was added extra, and you can kind of tell from the siding that it was added for this particular production, which was Much Ado About Nothing. And you can see the students there standing next to the stage. You can see how tall the stage is, but I will tell you that I leaned on it like that. They would not let me walk on it, even though I'm an actor, even though I'm a director, a college professor. They don't care. So the stage is roughly 2 meters tall, or armpit height for me. And that allows people to have a very good view, whether they're seated above or standing on the ground. All right, another look at the 3 levels as I stand on the ground. Lots of tours wandering through constantly when there's not a production. And here's a map of London. Now, as you look at the solid line, down in the bottom right corner you see the Tower of London, and then there's a solid black line which was the city wall, and then it comes down almost in the middle. You see St. Paul's Cathedral. You see a circle there called the Blackfriars, and then across the River Thames you see a circle for the Globe. All right, that's the original spot of the Globe. The new one is not in the same spot, but they created it in a very similar location. And then the other red circle for Blackfriars, that was the second theater Shakespeare worked in. It was actually an indoor theater. When the theaters were banned and burned, theater went underground into enclosed spaces, and that became the Blackfriars. But over here you can see all these great names: the Curtain, the Fortune, the Globe, the Hope, the Phoenix or the Cockpit, the Red Bull, the Rose, Salisbury Court, the Swan, the Theater, Whitefriars. And of course here's Blackfriars and the original spot of the Globe. And you can see here the Rose and the Hope and the Swan. These were very popular. What they would do is they would only perform during the day because they had no way to light the stage. They would raise a flag from the theater, and people on the north shore of the Thames would see the flag, go across London Bridge to, quote, the wrong side of the tracks to see a show. This was also where all the whorehouses were and most of the bars were. So it was a good day of entertainment for everybody. All right, now if you went and you were important, or if you appeared on stage, this is what you would wear: gentlemen. So yes, this is a man's Elizabethan outfit. This is what the actors wore on stage. They would wear generally their own clothes. So the very elaborate hats, the ruff around the neck, which mirrored what Elizabeth wore, the what we call the pumpkin pants, the woolen hose, the boots or shoes. It was all very ornate. It was a big deal to dress up and go to the theater. This costume is specific to a character named Malvolio from Twelfth Night. All right, ladies, this is your undergarments. This is what goes under all of your clothes. So there's layers upon layers of clothing here, and this is where I always talk about underwear. Underwear in the Elizabethan time. Generally, you only wore one pair for about a year if you were poor, and you got sewn into it. You never really took it off. And that's why some underwear you see historically has little flaps in the front and the back to take care of, business. And then it's also designed, underwear specifically is designed to keep your outer clothes nicer. Because yes, you can get stuff on your clothes like food or drink or mess, but really it's to keep the stink and the oils from you, your skin, getting into those nice clothes. So ladies, here's your undergarments, and there's your overdress. You've got your little hat, you've got your very elaborate dress. At this time, you are exaggerating your hips because it looks good for breeding. And later on, you will exaggerate your butt, which is called the bustle in Victorian times, and that also was very attractive to men. Men have invented most of this to make women look more attractive. And gentlemen, there's another fabulous outfit for you: bright yellow, any sort of colors. They would have blues, golds, not much purple. That was saved for royalty. Not a lot of red or orange, but as brightly colored as they could get. And then, ladies, if you were in mourning, if your husband had passed, you'd wear something elaborate like this, very black. And you'd probably wear it for a year, and that's referenced over and over in Shakespeare's plays. So here are two college students. They're out earning summer money in Stratford-on-Avon, Shakespeare's town of birth, and they're wearing versions of Elizabethan clothes out in the regular public and performing. And unfortunately, I could never catch her not in front of that tree. Sorry, I didn't get a better shot, but you can see sort of the simplified middle-class, lower-class version of the fancy clothes. And they're out doing Shakespeare scenes in the garden of Shakespeare's birth home and doing a really nice job of it. So in the Globe, they didn't have aluminum and plastic. They used real things for props. So there you see real swords, real crests. You see a little bit of armor in the background and a throne. Here is the bed. You can't do Othello without the bed. That's where Desdemona dies. You can't do Romeo and Juliet without the bed because that's where they have sex the first time. Over and over, we've got references to beds in Shakespeare's works, so you have to have one. There's a clearer shot of the armor and some of the helmets, and then little bodkins in the back there. Those are small knives. And then here's a side view of some of those amazing helmets. These would have been real. They would have been very heavy. The actors would have been incredibly well trained in safety. All right, here is Shakespeare's birth house, and right there in the middle with the bag on her shoulder is my sister. This was us in 2011, having just come from the house. This is where he was born, where he was raised. And that's me inside. Ooh, that is 20 years ago when I didn't have gray hair. All right, but you can see I'm standing next to a doorway, and this tells you how different sized people were back in the 1600s than they are today. We as a human race have gotten taller and larger. And if you see their beds, they look impossibly small for two people, but we are just of a different stature than we used to be. Here is us walking down the road, Stratford-on-Avon, our tour of 15, and we are walking by this building, which is Shakespeare's School. It is now an apartment building, so you can rent an apartment where Shakespeare went to school, and we are walking toward the church. So this is the only picture that I took inside the church that I wanted to pose today, but when William Shakespeare died, he was taken back to Stratford-on-Avon, and he was put in a tomb right here at the altar of the church. And right there next to him, you can barely read it, but there's Anne, his wife, and then on the other side is Susanna, his daughter, and then on the other side of Susanna is the doctor, her husband, and they're the only people buried right here in this location, and they are buried facing the altar. So the lore of the rapture, of the day when all are risen into heaven and perfect and their bodies are perfected, if they were to sit up, they would see not the congregation, but the altar. And because of that, his epitaph, what's written on his grave, is essentially backwards. So what they've done is taken a little picture here and reversed it for you so you can see. The grave of the poet William Shakespeare. Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man to spare these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones. So, Shakespeare supposedly wrote this himself. He did not want to be buried in London. He didn't want to be buried any place famous. He wanted to be buried in his church. And so he lays this curse on his own grave. Leave me here. Blessed be the man who spares these stones. Cursed be he who moves my bones. And even though he passed in the mid-1600s, he is still buried there today. And of course now the church at Stratford-on-Avon and the whole town are very famous because of that. But why do we like Shakespeare so much? Why do people believe he was the greatest? Because many of his works are about life, love, death, revenge, grief, jealousy, murder, magic, mystery. And we call these universal truths. We're all fascinated by all of these: life, love, death, revenge, grief, jealousy. We see it every day in our modern movies. We see it in our soap operas. We hear it in our songs. He wrote the blockbusters, quote unquote, of the day, but he wasn't the only one. Some of his most famous plays are Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, and Hamlet, many, many others. Midsummer Night's Dream, you've probably heard of. And although it's been almost 400 years, well, scratch that, maybe 500 now, people still celebrate his work all around the world, and he is still one of the most produced playwrights in the world. So I hope this gives you a little viewpoint into Shakespeare's life and adds to your understanding of this guy. And thanks for listening.